All right, so Clapper lied again, committed perjury again, and the media ignores it again because they are the great protectors of the deep state. Sara Carter is with us, Fox News contributor, investigative reporter. She's putting all her material up on her website. We always link it to our website, saraacarter.com. All right, let's talk first about Clapper and then your explosive column from last night. But Clapper, saying what he's saying here, he's lying again. He's caught lying again because he leaked to CNN, where he's now getting a paycheck.
Well, this is what happens, Sean, when you keep having to change your story, when you first start telling lies and they get all tangled up. I mean, what we know now is that, and remember, we reported this in early March, that Congress was actually looking at Clapper, that there were inconsistencies with his testimony to them, particularly about the dossier. And when that dossier, the information in that dossier was leaked to CNN, to Jake Tapper and the other reporters, which, by the way, won a very prestigious, what was known as a very prestigious award at the White House Correspondents' Dinner for that story. And so part of the problem here is that right after the president was briefed, and this was in January 2017, early January, he was briefed by Comey. He's already admitted that. On the most salacious parts of the dossier in that meeting with Trump in Trump Tower. And Comey himself said that Clapper was the one who directed him to give that briefing to the president. And shortly after those briefings took place, CNN reports on the briefing, reports on the contents of the dossier, and breaks the story. Shortly after CNN reports, BuzzFeed post the entire dossier on their website.
Now, I got to stop you for one thing. Nobody's corroborated a thing. Fusion
That's
GPS
right.
never corroborated a thing. Clapper never corroborated a thing. CNN never corroborated a thing. Same with BuzzFeed. So what you have here is the director of national intelligence testifying that he did not leak this information when, in fact, we now discovered he did.
That's right. And you said it exactly correctly. They never corroborated anything. So here you have the heads of our intelligence agencies, right? The FBI, the DNI, the Director of National Intelligence, the head of the CIA then, John Brennan, going over to Trump Tower. And basically, right before they leave, Comey goes over, pushes, takes President Trump aside. Everybody else leaves the room. And he begins to tell him about this dossier, which, by the way, none of them have corroborated, but they did use months earlier, now we know, in a FISA warrant against Carter Page, who was a short-time volunteer for the Trump campaign, which is very interesting in and of itself. Now we have the memos, and Comey specifically points out Clapper, saying Clapper wanted me to give the president this private briefing, right, on this dossier. He also says in the memos that CNN, BuzzFeed, other news agencies have this dossier, but they don't have a news hook to run them. But surely, right after that meeting with President Trump, then President-elect Trump, there was the news hook. And a day later, you have CNN running with the story.
It's so like you've got a nexus here where, again, what was this all about? This was about undermining. Look, there's many levels of this. One was keeping Hillary Clinton, who had committed felonies, and putting the fix in and rigging the investigation. That's a big component in all of this. Hillary, definitely, it's irrefutable. It's incontrovertible. The evidence is overwhelming. She mishandled classified top secret special access programming information. She destroyed it. She obstructed justice. But it was Strzok. It was Page. It was Comey, it was McCabe, and it looks like Loretta Lynch, all involved in some level of putting the fix in, writing an exoneration before investigation, letting Strzok, the anti-Trump person that he is, interview Hillary. With all this talk about the New York Times and questions for Trump should get the Hillary treatment. What's the Hillary treatment? Not under oath and meaningless with an exoneration 2 days later. Get the Hillary treatment.
Well, even worse, Sean, even worse. If you think about this, they were taking information, salacious lies because they haven't proved any of it yet. And they were taking it from the Russians, paid for by the Hillary Clinton campaign and the DNC. And they were running basically an operation against the president, right? Because they just needed to get the information out there. the lies out there. I call it the disinformation campaign. Believe me, this is something that intelligence agencies are experts at. The Russians are experts at it. The United States is experts at it. There are experts all over the world that run these type of disinformation campaigns against people that they want to target. And all you need to do is get that false information out there, solidify it in the mainstream media or in a news article, and let it burn like wildfire. And that's exactly what happened.
This is what the former Soviet Union was known for. In other words, I read a book years ago, The Synthesis of Russian Mind Control Techniques. And when you use that phrase last night on TV, misinformation, disinformation, you can replace it with any of the accompanying adjectives: propaganda, lies, distortions, purposely manipulating people before an election. Remember, neither Fusion GPS, nor the FBI, nor anybody involved in the Department of Justice corroborated that dossier, a lot of which has been debunked, but they also got the FISA warrant on it. And again, Fusion GPS, they admitted that they were disseminating this information, not corroborated to reporters. So you got high-ranking members in the Intelligence Committee working with, gullible sheep in the news media, but so too was Fusion GPS, selling lies to the American people in the lead up to an election.
And so, too, was former British spy Christopher Steele, who was hired by Fusion GPS, who then the FBI found out was actually briefing reporters when he was told by those handlers that he shouldn't be talking to reporters about this. Think about this. This is at that point in time, highly classified information. It was information that was being investigated by the FBI, even though there was no evidence that any of this had happened, even though the people who were purporting this to happen were ex-Russian spies who were probably paid for by Christopher Steele with the money that he got from the Hillary Clinton campaign and the DNC, and Christopher Steele himself. Now, these are all foreign agents. It wasn't like someone from the United States within the CIA had uncovered some kind of evidence, or somebody within the FBI's counterintelligence division discovered some kind of evidence. There was absolutely no evidence, other than now we know that Christopher Steele was trying to shop this thing around, and now we know that Christopher Steele was also in connection with some of Hillary Clinton's closest allies at the State Department that were also funneling information back and forth at this time. This is incredible, because all of this, the last over 15 months that the president, this new administration, has had to endure, all of this pain and alienation over lies. And Americans have to get this through their head. This was not based on any factual information. If it was, we would have already seen it. We've never had a leak on the facts, right? It's something that I always say when John Brennan puts out his tweets, going after the president. And this is why this is so important, Sean, and I brought it up in my story. There's an ethical issue at play here, too. Not only did Clapper, and a lot of people that I've talked to, a lot of my sources believe that Clapper was the one that leaked this to CNN, and I think it spells it out very clearly in that Russia report. But then months later, he goes on to get a job at CNN as a paid analyst. So you have to ask yourself, was this quid pro quo?
Well, wait a minute. But CNN had to know that he perjured themselves. CNN knew.
Talk to him.
Well, of course they knew. I mean, which speaks volumes. Because we have so much ground to cover. What did you think of Brennan's tweet about the House Intel Committee? Oh, it means nothing. It's partisan, et cetera, et cetera. And then he says, kind of cryptically, stay tuned, Mr. Trump. Now, here is the former CIA director. I'm reading a deep state threat into that. Does he know something, or is he just, because this is what they do. I mean, in a good way, the CIA is supposed to be good at lying. They're supposed to be good at disinformation, but not against their own citizens. Not against the
President of the United States.
Exactly.
Here is a man, John Brennan, who I have interviewed in the past and I've met in the past, who led probably one of the most prominent spy agency in the entire world, and he is targeting his own president. Sean, this is something out of countries you see like in Pakistan, and I've said this over and over again, and in other countries throughout the world, banana republics, as some of the congressional members would like to call it. He is literally threatening and targeting the President of the United States, acting as if he has some kind of information that is going to take this president down. Let me tell you, the only thing Mr. Brennan is doing is damaging the integrity of our country, because he is not supposed to be partisan. He can be partisan at home. He can say whatever he wants about Trump in his house, in the privacy of his home, with his wife, with his children, whoever he wants to, with his friends. But you do not, unless you have proof that somebody has done something egregious or committed a criminal act, you do not go after the President of the United States when you were the sitting director of the CIA.
They write this, Sara Carter, investigative reporter, her report, Blockbuster, on Ronny Jackson, who was responsible for giving Senator Tester that information that ultimately turned out to be false in a smear effort of the president's doctor. We'll get to that next. Right, as we continue with investigative reporter, Fox News contributor Sara Carter is with us. SaraACarter.com is her website. But you broke a story how Vice President Mike Pence's physician was behind these Ronny Jackson attacks and these leaks to Senator Tester, a smear job on the president's doctor. Tell us what you know.
Well, it's just incredible that we live in a time where somebody can just throw allegations onto a wall to see if they stick. And even if they don't stick, people continue to run with them. You know, after speaking to people, 4 separate administration officials, I was able to confirm that Vice President Mike Pence, Dr. Jennifer Pena, you know, she's assigned to the vice president through the White House medical unit, was the one that initially brought all those charges regarding Admiral Jackson to Congress. Now, this has been a long-time grudge, according to numerous sources, Sean, that I've spoken with, between Pena and Dr. Jackson inside the White House, since they were both, Pena came on board during the Obama administration. Ronny Jackson had been there since the Bush administration, but she did have other people with her. According to some sources that I spoke with, there were some other people from the vice president's office that went with her, and some other people that were there from before and from the Army medical unit. Now, they accused Dr. Jackson of horrific things, of driving a government vehicle while inebriated and crashing that vehicle, of overprescribing medication, that even I think the Montana senator called him, John Tester called him the candy man on television. I mean, throwing these incredible allegations at a man who served for 3 presidents. Now the Secret Service comes out and says, we have no records that he ever crashed any car. They go through all of the medical records at the hospital, making sure that there hasn't been any missing prescription medication. Everything is up to date. They find none of that. Then you have last night, CNN, who also broke a story shortly after my story ran, that now Pena is accusing him of basically breaking HIPAA laws because he treated the vice president's wife, Karen Pence. Now, what I have been told from my sources is that, and this is coming from the other side, so there's always 2 sides to one story, but was that, during this time, when Dr. Jackson treated Karen Pence, Dr. Pena was over 3 hours away. They had to use assets. They were at Camp David, which meant that they had to get a helicopter and take Karen Pence to wherever they needed to take her, to a hospital, whatever, for treatment. And that is the reason why, Dr. Jackson made the phone calls to say, we're using this asset, which is at Camp David, the helicopter. This is the reason why, and we're taking her to the hospital. And he had to contact the hospital and let them know that she was moving that way. Now, according to the sources that I spoke with, Pena was irate. She didn't want Dr. Jackson treating the second lady, but she was 3 hours away, and he felt that it was the only thing he could do. So now you have Dr. Jackson who's in the middle of this. Somebody described it as Madam Secretary or House of Cards type of situation. Really, he lost his nomination, right? He had to withdraw his name from going to the Veterans Affairs Administration. The president wanted to nominate him. Of course, there were people that didn't want him there. And I think it would be fair to say that you can argue whether or not he should have been there.
It's an unbelievable story. I can't even believe that this has happened. Sara Carter, you're going to stay with us here. We're going to update everybody when we get back on the story of the caravan. Mexico has allowed all these people from Central America to literally make it all across Mexico to the U.S. border, and they've done nothing. Meanwhile, if it's about Mexico, that we know what they do and how they treat illegal immigrants there. And Sara will stay with us, and we'll be joined by Chris Cabrera, who's the spokesman for the National Border Patrol Council. That's next as we continue. All right, as we look at the situation now that has been unfolding at the border, glad you're with us. 24 now till the top of the hour. I don't think, besides myself, there's been any one other person in the news media that's been down to the border as much as me, besides Sara Carter, and she stays with us now in this particular segment. We're also joined by Chris Cabrera. He's a spokesman for the National Border Patrol Council. Sara Carter, how many times have you been down there?
Oh, gosh, I spent the whole beginning of my career up and down the U.S.-Mexico border and spent so much time in Mexico I can't even count.
Yeah. Maybe were you down there with Linda? Because Linda bought a timeshare down in Mexico when she was 20. Thank God we're getting her out of her timeshare because she only went back once. And thank God for Lone Star Transfer because they get a sponsor of ours. But in all seriousness, I've been down there like you, and you see, on the one hand, I can see, Sara, I remember one time being in a particular area in San Diego, and they did have a fence in this area, and I'm looking across to Mexico, and you see these kids playing with, in what we would describe as a dump with old tires and garbage and, horrible poverty. On the other side, you got $500,000, $1 million homes, and if I'm living on the one side, I'd want to be on the other side. But the real fear is the opioids, the drugs that are targeting America's kids that are coming across that border every day. Just watch the Showtime show Trade, and you'll see it all happening. And the second issue is, well, if somebody crosses the border because they want a job, so too can somebody that has Islamic extremist views or some other bizarre ideology, and they want to commit harm on American citizens. That's a problem, too.
All kinds of contraband. Anything can move across that border. I've been down there so many times, that I can tell you, Sean, even going into Mexico, what I do is I'd go through the actual checkpoints. I'd go into Mexico. I spent time in Agua Prieta. I spent time in Tijuana. I spent time in Nuevo Laredo. Even during the biggest battles in Nuevo Laredo, when I remember Vicente Fox had to send the federales, down into the border and send their army down there to just try to protect the citizens, and their own Mexican army fled the area within a week because the fighting intensified so much between the drug cartels that they were terrified. They couldn't even control their own cities, and you talk about the squalor. I've seen the squalor on the other side, sure, and then the $1 million homes on our side. But, Sean, let me tell you this. I've also seen the $1 million homes on their side that the drug cartels were using, building tunnels through there to move their drugs into Arizona. So, into the warehouses in Arizona. And I would go into Mexico and I would see these guys with, these machine guns on the rooftops, protecting these houses that were really just places where they could store the narcotics and people, remember that, before moving them into the United States. This is a very serious national security issue. Not only are we dealing with contraband and human trafficking, and all kinds of issues and human suffering, but we really don't know what comes across that border because our resources are very limited. And you can see that right now. Look at what they're doing right now in California. I mean, the resources are limited there. But there's areas of our border, just like the president has said, and ICE director has said this, and many other people in the DEA, that's wide open, where people can move back and forth. And we just don't have enough people out on patrol to do the jobs that they need to do. And for 8 years, their hands were tied behind their backs.
Let me go to Chris Cabrera, who's with us. Chris, let's talk about your experience and how dangerous this job is for the men and women that do patrol the border, and how Mexico is very duplicitous because the government of Mexico treats immigrants from El Salvador, Nicaragua, and Central America horribly. They throw them in jail. They deport them immediately. They're demanding America accept all of this illegal immigration that they themselves won't accept. And they let this caravan, walk right through their entire country and did nothing to stop them, knowing that their goal was to get to the American border.
Yeah, exactly. It's a shame that Mexico turns a blind eye towards enforcement when it comes to helping the United States out. However, when they want something from us, they're there with their hand out. And with these 1,500 that came up, I think what a lot of folks are forgetting is in our area, in the Rio Grande Valley, we're seeing 1,500 just at one station alone of Central Americans coming in. We're getting, a few hundred every single day. Just because only a couple hundred showed up in California, that doesn't mean they disbanded and went back to their home country.
Yeah. Well, is it true? What does Mexico do when people are illegal in their country from El Salvador, Nicaragua? Are they not put in jail? Are they not immediately deported? They are. So why didn't Mexico stop this caravan if they want to be partners with the United States on trade and other issues?
The way Mexico handles deportations is they tell these folks that they have X amount of days to leave the country. They don't send them back to their country of origin. So most of them just continue on their journey north. And Mexico's not too concerned about it because they know they're leaving anyway. So they don't have to spend the money to get them back home. And they just pass the buck on to us.
So I guess they're not too concerned about what the relationship is like with the United States.
Well, and that's the thing is, when there's trade involved, when there's money involved for them, they're very concerned. But when it's helping us out and being a good neighbor to the South, it's just not the case.
Yeah. And Sara, as I remember walking around the drug warehouse in particular. It had a pretty profound impact on me. And you look at the opioid epidemic, and it is an epidemic in this country, and all these drugs, and you see that a lot of them are coming across that border, a lot of them. And these are drugs that are killing American kids. We're talking about, we don't know, nobody knows what they're buying in the streets of Cleveland, a big town, a small city, or anywhere else in the country that has, serious opioid problems, which is basically every small town and big city in America. And this is big, big money. And we have the ability to protect ourselves. I'm having a hard time understanding why people are resistant to just enforcing the law, respecting our sovereignty, and asking people to come here legally. I know your parents, my grandparents came here legally.
Exactly. And let's just go back to your point about the amount of drugs that are coming across the border, and it's killing our children. And particularly if you think about fentanyl, fentanyl, which is very similar, it's an opioid, it's very similar to morphine. It is 50 to 100 times more potent than morphine. And that is what they're bringing across the border. And so a lot of these kids, they're cutting it, they're utilizing this, they don't even know what they're taking. They die sometimes the first time they try it. We have an epidemic across our nation. Our children are being taken hostage by these drugs and by these drug cartels and these organized crimes. And Chris and I, we spent a lot of time at the border together years ago, and Chris can tell you how dangerous this is and how these drug cartels battle. I've been on the border in Laredo, Texas, and have literally watched gun battles in Nuevo Laredo because these drug cartels are fighting over our highway systems. They're fighting over our highway systems. We need to protect our border. We need to be able to say, look, this is a national security issue. More than anything else, We can deal with the immigration issues because we've got to deal with Mexico, Honduras, the governments in Guatemala. We've got to deal with those governments in order to slow the flow of all these people. And I don't know what that's going to require. If that's going to require the president to have a stronger hand with these nations to say, look, if you want us to assist you, you've got to do more to assist your people. But as far as our border is concerned, Sean, our border is a national security issue for our country. We have people attempting to bring narcotics into our country that is literally killing our children. And someone needs to stand up for this. And like you said earlier, we don't know who's crossing that border. That's a whole other issue.
Let me ask you, there was another question I meant to ask you in the last segment. Rod Rosenstein was answering a question about the House Freedom Caucus members and the draft to impeach him. They can't even resist leaking their own draft, he says. The Department of Justice will not be extorted. What's your reaction to that?
It's incredible. I mean, look, Rod Rosenstein has stonewalled, has stymied Congress, has refused to give up information that is necessary for oversight. And in some ways, it appears that Rod Rosenstein is the one in charge of the Justice Department. And now he has the gall to come out and say that, we're not going to be threatened by Congress. Well, then work with Congress. Help Congress have oversight over what's been going on. Because what happened during the Clinton investigation, which was a travesty, and what happened with President Trump and this administration and the campaign between the FBI and the DOJ absolutely needs to be thoroughly investigated, and people need to be held accountable. But it seems like in our government right now, Sean, there is a battle between those that want to do the right thing and get the information out to the American public and those that want to cover it up. So I think go for it, Congress. Keep putting out these letters. Keep threatening with contempt because we deserve to see those documents. We deserve to know the truth.
Chris, we'll give you the last word on this immigration issue, and you talk to these guys every day in your position as the spokesperson for the National Border Patrol Council. How are they feeling?
Well, the agents, they're optimistic yet frustrated. I know the president's doing everything in his power to get things done. It's just that there's so much bureaucratic red tape. We've had this loophole since 2014. Unfortunately, it has yet to be closed. And I think what the American people need to understand is we're down here on the border. We're seeing these folks come in, but we're also on the sideline of in a sense of parade. And these people are just continuing north. They're not staying down here. They're going to the Virginias, the Marylands, the DCs. They're going to the rest of America. They're not staying here. And so whatever they bring with them, whatever baggage they bring, and we see a lot of diseases come through, whatever they bring through, it goes to your cities. They don't stay in ours. And I think that's what people are missing. And it is a problem for the rest of the country, not just what's going on down here.
All right. Tell us about the third-party agreement with Canada that they have an obligation to step in themselves when they see this type of law breaking at the border, that there is a responsibility and they can't get into the United States because they should have done something themselves. Yeah,
exactly. And we have that. We should have that with both ends of this debate. We have it with Canada. We don't get any cooperation out of Mexico. And I've actually had issues where we're actually in the thick of things down there with an assault or shots fired on the river, and we call Mexican authorities, and if they show up, they do nothing.
If they show up, a lot of
times they show up. We've even had it one time where we saw them coming down hot and heavy with the red and blue lights on, and they just opened the gates up for the cartel guys to just go on by and leave, and they locked up for them. So, right, that's just what we deal with on a daily basis.
Well, stay safe, and thank you for what you do every day, Sara. We'll see you on Hannity tonight. A lot of breaking news, 9 Eastern on the Fox News Channel.